So I want to talk about the advancements in sustainability when it comes to cars and road cars in particular. I mean, it's something that we're speaking about a lot. The waste problem is something that has been in the forefront of our news for quite some time now, and so it should be. And ensuring that cars can be more sustainable, not just with their engines, but also in the way that they're made. That is something that I imagine a lot of manufacturers are looking more into.
Yes, and there's different levels of this. I think the first thing is to look at the types of fuels that are being used in racing. And IndyCar and NASCAR, for instance, have used biofuels. In fact, IndyCar right now is 100% renewables, which means it's not a fossil fuel, but it's made from some sort of, like, for instance, sugarcane or corn or whatever it might be. And Formula One, in their drive for net zero by 2030, by 2025, most of their series, almost all of them, will actually be e-fuels. And e-fuels are 100% renewable. And the reason which is different than the biofuels, an e-fuel actually is made by extracting hydrogen from water and taking CO2 out of the air, combining them, and then ultimately through chemical processes coming up with the fuel that you would run in the car. So you're in effect extracting the CO2 out of the atmosphere, moving it somewhere else, and then putting it back in. But hey, that's net zero. So e-fuels are more expensive, very expensive right now, but it's definitely a step towards a way for an internal combustion engine to actually be net zero. When you look at the regulations for 2030 and becoming net zero, the focus is always on the car itself, but it's actually less than 1% of the emissions that come from putting on an F1 event. Most of the emissions come from the logistics of moving the cars, the paddock, all the equipment that you need to put the race on. Then there's also moving the people themselves, the broadcasters, whatever it might be. And that comes to almost 75% or so of the total emissions. And Formula One is doing a lot of things to try and bring that down. I think, though, one of the most interesting things about all this is if you were to compare Formula One, say, to cycling, and that would be like the Tour de France, the Giro Italia, the Volta from Spain, estimates show that the amount of emissions on those cycling events, because it's about the logistics of moving everything around, and of course they have internal combustion engine chase cars, is 6 to 7 times greater than what you have in Formula One in terms of carbon emissions. And more interesting is the FIA is pushing so hard that it forces the teams to actually measure their emissions. If you don't measure and know where you are now, then how do you know if you've improved? And when they did this study comparing cycling to Formula One, one of the issues they had was they only had hard numbers for the Tour de France, and they had to do estimates on the rest. So a lot of pressure on motorsports to be sustainable. As a result, let's start by measuring and then trying to improve against that. And I think when you look at the other sports and you see, like cycling, that in some ways they're actually lagging behind what's happening in motorsports and Formula One.
That is fascinating. I never, ever in a million years would ever have guessed that cycling has a bigger carbon footprint than Formula One. That is something that most people would never even assume, but it makes sense because the other thing as well on top of that is, of course, cycling is a much longer event. It lasts, I'm not a cycling fan personally, but it lasts several days or several weeks rather than an F1 event, which is like 3-4 days in total.
Right, exactly. And if you look at this idea of logistics and moving equipment and things like that, for instance, the Extreme E off-road racing series, which focuses on sustainability, is a virtual event. And in fact, there are no spectators. Now, they do move the equipment and they do all that. However, it's primarily an online event. And there is a new racing series that's in the works. It's by a company called Avicar. And what Avicar is doing is they have a technology that's going to allow you to control a real race car on a racetrack remotely, hundreds or thousands of miles away. So if you think about that, if you have an electric or hydrogen-powered, remote-controlled, in their case, it's a half-size race car, you're now hitting on all the big aspects of sustainability. and you could become a driver yourself right in your living room.
Well, I mean, I've been a driver myself for my living room for years, but always on the PlayStation. But it's fantastic to see. It's fantastic to see that that's becoming a reality with real motorsport. So yeah, great insights by Ed, as always there. And which topic do you want to hear us discuss next? Ed is a former VP of Siemens Motorsports division, so he's got a lot of knowledge and experience, as he's just demonstrated there, when it comes to the world of motorsport and the motoring world as well. And yeah, be sure to follow us as well on our social platforms and also our video platforms as well for much more content just like this.